By the way, welcome everybody. This is the Southern Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce's September 10th edition of the town hall meeting. We've had, it looks like we got a good handful of people here. We have some great speakers ourselves. So we're going to have, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Lola real quickly, just so she can say hi and say welcome to everybody. And Lola, the mic is yours.
Super. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to September 10th Town Hall Edition. I'm the President and CEO of the Southern Colorado Women's Chamber, and we've been doing these monthly, since COVID started. We did them for the first 2 months, both March and April, weekly. And then as business started reopening and rebounding, we decided to go monthly. And we're picking topics that are of interest to our members and the business community that impact our members in the business community during these what we call uncertain times economically. So we have a great speaker today, and there's going to be great Q&A available for you as well. I typically stay on afterwards to answer some questions that you might have about the chamber. And today, unfortunately, I'm back to back with meetings, so I'll have to get off at about 5 o'clock because we're doing a CEO roundtable with a lot of our members to get their feedback and how we can support them to be able to adapt, pivot, and thrive during these times. So I welcome you all. I also would love to thank our sponsor, Lidl Electric. They are sponsoring all of our virtual streaming of our town halls on this. So if you're thinking light, think Lidl. So thank you for being here. And Debbie, thank you for hosting, and I'll turn it over back to you.
Great. Thanks, Lola. So today we really got the high honor of having George Russo here. George is working with the Employers Council. He came to the Employers Council in 2017, moving here from Chicago, Illinois. So Colorado Springs is not his original home, but he's coming to love Colorado Springs, and you'll find him bumming around between coffee shops and breweries, so he seems to love Colorado Springs as his home. He is an attorney and came here out of working at a regional law office in Chicago, Illinois, and was originally just a regular attorney with the Employers Council, but in 2019 he was promoted to the director position. So he's obviously learned a lot, has got a lot of background in employment law, and so he's going to help us today talk about a few things going to help companies avoid litigation, especially around COVID, the pandemic, or even maybe some of the diversity and inclusion things that have been going around. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and let George, you go ahead and start off, and we have some slides for George. At the end, we'll have some Q&A, so please be ready. We'll be glad to do Q&A, but if you have questions in the meantime, please go ahead and put them in the chat room, and we'll see if we can include them as part of George's presentation. Thanks so much. Go ahead, George.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. So like Debbie said, I'm George Russo. I work with Employers Council. I'm also an attorney there. I tried to pick a bunch of different issues that employers were seeing with regards to COVID. And so if you go to the next slide, I tried to give a range of different things. The first one was returning to work. I know a lot of employers have already gone through this, but I still want to touch upon a lot of the issues that can come up with returning to work. The other are some of the new laws that came out with regards to COVID. The first being the FFCRA, or Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and the other being the Colorado's Healthy Families and Workplace Act. So the FFCRA is a federal law, and the Healthy Families is a Colorado law. They were both passed in response to COVID, or partially in response to COVID. And then the last topic I wanted to touch upon was layoffs, alternatives to layoffs, and unemployment, all of which, unfortunately, are things we have to deal with regards to COVID. So if you go to the next slide, and I know there's a lot here, so I might be talking quickly, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end. So with returning to work, there are quite a few laws and issues that employers can run into. The first one that I like to bring up to employers is one that is often overlooked, and it is OSHA. OSHA has a general duties clause, which requires employers to provide a safe workplace. And obviously with COVID, that is a big issue. So when you have employees returning to work or employees who have already returned to work, you want to make sure that you are following CDC guidance and state of Colorado guidance, the Colorado Public Health Department guidance with regards to your workplace. Colorado breaks it down by industry, and so does the CDC. Those are things you want to look at, because if you are not at a minimum doing those things in your workplace to keep your employees safe, you may run into an OSHA violation later on. The next one is another large order that came out of COVID, and it's one that it deals with a lot of issues that employers are dealing with. It deals with a lot of issues related to COVID, but it's the Colorado Safer at Home order. There's a bunch of different levels of it, and it has different names. But the one part that employers need to be aware of is that the Safer at Home order says that vulnerable individuals cannot be compelled to return to work. And so with that, Colorado employers need to know whether or not they are running afoul of this by separating employees when they refuse to return to work. So if you have an employee who is refusing to return to work, you need to make sure or look into whether or not they fall into the protection of the Safer at Home order and whether or not they're a vulnerable individual and therefore cannot be compelled to return to work. There are some alternatives that an employer can do. They can give them work from home, or they can give them a leave of absence. And briefly, a vulnerable individual is someone with a lung condition, a heart condition, and serious lung condition, serious heart condition, diabetes, someone who is pregnant, someone who is over 65, or someone who a doctor has said they are particularly vulnerable due to some pre-existing condition. With that, the next one is FFCRA, which I'll talk about in a bit. But a couple others that employers need to remember still apply in this situation, which are ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA. Both of those, employers don't want to forget about those. I know there's a bunch of new laws and new orders that employers need to comply with, but you don't want to forget about ADA and FMLA. ADA allows for accommodation when someone has a disability. And FMLA provides leave for someone who has a serious health condition. Fear of COVID is likely not a disability, nor is it a serious health condition, but you still want to go through the process when you have an employee who says, I need an accommodation because I have this disability. You want to make sure you're following your ADA and FMLA process if you are subject to FMLA. The last two I'll just touch upon briefly. The National Labor Relations Act protects employees when they are engaging in protected concerted activity, when they're talking about terms and conditions of employment. One area where this can come up is if you have 2 or more employees talking about safety issues. For example, I don't believe we have proper PPE to protect us against COVID. That would be discussing terms and conditions of employment. That would be protected activity, and employers cannot discipline for protected activity. The last one is masks. As everyone likely knows now, masks, there's a mask mandate in Colorado. Employers need to comply with that. So if you have 2 or more employees from 2 different households, they need to be wearing a mask inside. Those generally are the return to work issues. There are others, but those are the big ones that I wanted to touch upon. Next slide. So the FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, by now everyone should have heard of it. It went into effect on April 1st of this year, and it sunsets or expires on December 31st of this year. So it is a temporary law that will end at the end of this year. The law provides paid sick leave and paid expanded FMLA. These are the 6 reasons that someone can take the paid sick leave. Generally, they are for someone having COVID or caring for someone with COVID. The paid sick leave is up to 80 hours of sick leave, so there is a maximum amount or the equivalent of 2 weeks pay. So if someone only works part-time and they work 20 hours a week, they would only get 40 hours of paid sick leave because that is the equivalent of 2 weeks. Reasons 1 through 3 are 100% pay, 4 through 6 are 2/3 pay. And employers can get a tax credit for the amount that they pay to the employee through this paid sick leave program. So the IRS will actually essentially pay back employers for the amount of leave that they pay out. The expanded FMLA is for this one reason. It is caring for a child whose school or place of care is closed due to COVID. We saw a lot of schools close in March and April of this year. And so a lot of employees were able to take advantage of this. This is up to 12 weeks. It is a shared 12 weeks with FMLA. So if someone had broken their leg and used 6 weeks, they only have 6 weeks of this expanded FMLA. And this does cover employers who are below 50 employees. It covers all employers below 500, the FFCRA does. Right now, most Colorado Springs schools are open. However, if that does change in the future, this is one that you want to be aware of, that the expanded FMLA might kick in if schools close due to COVID. And close means that the physical location is closed. Those schools may be offering online schooling, but if the physical location is closed, those schools are closed. Some schools have gone to a hybrid where on Monday and Tuesday they are open, but Thursday and Friday they're closed. Thursday and Friday, an employee might be would likely be able to take this expanded FMLA. Next slide. So the other law, so FFCRA is a federal law, and the Healthy Families and Workplace is a Colorado law. FFCRA only covers employers that have 500 or fewer employees. The Healthy Families and Workplace Act for 2020 expanded that to cover all employers in Colorado. So if you have over 500 employees in Colorado, you now need to comply with the paid sick leave portion of FFCRA. You do not need to comply with the expanded FMLA, but you do need to comply with the paid sick leave, which is that 80 hours or 2 weeks equivalent paid sick leave. That will sunset or expire at the end of 2020, and then the Healthy Families will move into a new stage. In 2021, employers with 16 or more employees will need to provide paid sick leave to all employees. It will need to be at least 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. So all of your employees will need to have some level of paid sick leave. Part-time employees will accrue that sick leave slower than full-time employees, but part-time, PRN, or as-needed employees, they will need to be given sick leave at a rate of at least 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. Up to a maximum of 48 hours, which is 6 days of sick leave. So if you provide 6 days of sick leave, you would be compliant. PTO would also be compliant if it allowed the sick leave to be used for the reasons set forth in the Healthy Families and Workplace Act, which generally is for an individual's own illness, for their family member's illness, for domestic abuse, and for pandemic emergencies. In 2022, Healthy Families will be expanded to all employers in Colorado, not just those employers with 16 or more. Next slide. And one thing that I wanted to mention briefly was a ballot initiative that is coming up in the upcoming election. There is a Colorado paid family leave ballot proposal on the ballot for this year's election. It would provide 12 weeks of paid leave for employees for FMLA type reasons. So for serious health conditions of the employee or the employee's family member, also for domestic abuse, and also for inpatient medical stays. The state would run this, and it would be funded through employee contributions. Payments would not start until 2024, but the state would start funding the program prior to that. I think you're going to talk about this next month, but I just wanted to give you kind of a primer on this.
Yes, we are.
Thank you. Next slide. Last topic that I wanted to touch on was layoffs or alternatives to layoffs. So a couple of alternatives to layoffs I wanted to start with. One is a reduction in pay or a reduction in hours. You are allowed to reduce your employee's pay if you have a reason to do so. And generally the DOL is not going to look into the reason. Essentially, you can reduce pay prospectively. You still want to make sure you are not going below minimum wage for your non-exempt employees, which is $12 an hour, or the minimum salary, which is $35,568 per year, $538 per week for exempt employees. So you are allowed to reduce pay prospectively, meaning going forward, but you don't want to go below those minimums. You are also allowed to reduce hours. This is most effective for your non-exempt or hourly employees because non-exempt employees are only paid for the hours that they are actually working. If they are not working, they don't need to be paid. So you could, in the middle of a shift, send home a non-exempt employee and you would be able to stop paying them in the middle of that shift. These are ways to avoid a layoff. Obviously, these are going to have negative employee relation effects, but I put them out there as a way that employers have used to avoid laying off employees. Another method would be a furlough. A furlough is essentially a temporary job-attached layoff. It is pay. We don't have work coming in right now, but we expect work to come in the future. And so we are going to lay you off for a short duration of period until that work ramps back up. A lot of employers use this during COVID, and now that employers are opening back up, they are bringing back employees from furlough. A furlough, you have no commitment as an employer, so you could say this is temporary and then turn it into a permanent layoff. So it's really a good option for employers because it allows them to bring back staff quickly, or if they need to, unfortunately, lay off, they can do that. For your exempt staff or your salaried staff, if you furlough them for a week, they don't need to get paid for that week. If it's less than a week, they do need to get their full salary for that week. But if you would furlough an exempt employee for a full week, you don't need to pay them for that week. You can get creative, so you can do 1 week off, 1 week on, which would reduce the cost of that exempt employee 50%, or you could do 4 weeks on, 1 week off, and that would reduce your cost 20%. Layoffs, unfortunately, have been necessary during COVID. Some things to think about is the WARN Act. If you are over 50 employees, depending on the size of your layoff and the type of layoff, you may need to give up to 60 days notice based on the WARN Act. Some other things to think about is Colorado requires private employers to pay out vacation. They also require the final pay to be paid out at separation. There are some exceptions to that, but generally you should pay out the final pay the last day of the employee's work. Lastly, unemployment. I'm sure everyone has now heard that the $600 supplement from the federal government is no longer in effect. That has expired. There was a $300 supplement. I believe those are expiring soon. So there are no longer any supplements, or soon there will no longer be supplements. Colorado maximum unemployment for a week is $618 per week. If you have an employee who has had reduced hours, they may be eligible for unemployment. So they can still be working and getting unemployment depending on the circumstances.
Baylessville, okay. Bummer.
And
Because actually,
what was it? And then another thing that employers should be aware of is there is a job share program with Colorado unemployment. This is similar to that reduction in hours, where instead of laying off employees, if you reduce their hours a certain amount and apply for this job share program, Colorado unemployment will pay a portion of the employee's salary, and you will pay a portion of the salary, the employer will. And so the employee will have reduced hours, but their income will not be reduced fully to what they would be if you didn't participate in this job share. The last thing I want to mention is COVID unemployment. If unemployment is related to COVID, the federal government is picking up most of the tab. So if you are a taxed employer and the unemployment is related to COVID for 2020, the employer will not be charged for those payments. If you are a reimbursable employer and the unemployment is related to COVID, you will only be charged 50%. A reimbursable employer is one who pays the state back dollar for dollar. But so those COVID-related unemployment, the employer is not going to be charged. So if you had to lay off a good number of employees, your tax rate will not skyrocket. And next slide, I think that's it. So I think I got a question in there.
Yeah, George, I think that is it, and I do appreciate you going through this. That's a lot of information.
Yeah.
We did have somebody early on in one of your earlier slides. They asked the question if did they hear correctly that a person cannot be disciplined if they don't feel that the safety precautions are sufficient at work. Is that true?
So depending on the circumstances. So the National Labor Relations Act, even if you don't have a union workforce, does apply, and it protects employees when they are discussing terms and conditions of employment. So if you had two employees who were complaining and saying, I don't feel that these safety precautions are sufficient, and they're talking to each other about those safety precautions, they can't be disciplined for that conversation.
Okay, that's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
We had a question that was submitted earlier before this happened, and I just want to see what you think of this. We had somebody that asked the question, what if you have an employee who's working remotely, but their performance is really slacking? What can you do in terms of discipline if there is any kind of discipline to be had?
You can discipline that employee. And it does become difficult to performance manage when an employee is not right next to you. But you do, if there are projects and people are falling behind, you can have those performance conversations. When someone is remote, communication is going to be key. So you're going to have either email communication, Zoom communication, or phone calls where you are telling that employee, here is what my expectation is. And if they are not meeting that expectation, you are able to write them up or give them a verbal warning and document that.
Okay, very interesting. And just for our listeners here or people who are attending, in October, we're going to have some people talking about the ballot issues. We're going to be talking about the Paid Family Leave Act. So to get some more information, both pros and cons, I hope you guys will plan on attending the October 8th town hall meeting, because we'll have some great information for you. So now I'm going to put George on the spot a little bit. We would like to talk a little bit about some of the diversity and inclusion movements that's been going on. We want to make sure that businesses stay well-informed and safe that way legally. So we have some people that, have some questions on this too. Unconscious bias is a big thing nowadays. And so sometimes we don't know that we're actually asserting some things that we think maybe not fair to other people of different races. So my question for you is, how can we maybe become more aware of unconscious bias, and what can we do as a business to be able to be more inclusive and to have better relations with everybody?
And that's a great question. I have heard from a lot of employers that this is definitely at the top of their mind. Some ideas that I've heard from our members is, one is just listening. A lot of times we don't know what someone else is experiencing because we have never taken the time to listen to them. And so I've heard from a lot of employers who have said, we're just sitting down and listening to our employees to say, what is it that issues that people have noticed, or areas where we can improve. So that unconscious bias, the first step, I think, is just having that conversation and being open to that conversation. Because, I've been in employment law for a while, and this is really been a big push recently. It has not been always on employers' kind of forefront. And so I think just being open to having that conversation is a really good first step for employers. Some other things that would be effective, there are some good trainings on this, and they do have a lot of good examples of that unconscious bias. We all have different experiences, and we all have different upbringings. Like Debbie said, I grew up in Chicago, and so that just right there is going to be different. I didn't grow up with mountains. I didn't grow up with ranches, and so some of my upbringing, I'm going to make assumptions that are not correct. And so that unconscious bias training is very helpful to just open your eyes as to what does that even mean, and how are we making assumptions just based on our upbringing. So I think those are two big first steps, is just having that conversation with employees and saying, we're willing to listen to you. We want to improve. We want to make sure that we have an inclusive environment, but also going to those trainings and listening to experts who have done the research and have good examples that employers can learn from.
And George, do you have some samples that you would mind sharing with us if you want to just be in touch with us, and we can push out to our membership?
Yeah, we do have diversity training. Employers Council has them. There was a big push a few years ago for like harassment prevention training, and then now there's a big push for diversity. They go hand in hand. Title VII is what deals with harassment, but also with diversity, you do want to be making sure you're complying with Title VII as well. They're kind of the flip side of each. So we do have trainings available for employers. And they are available even if they're not Employers Council members.
Okay, I do have another question here. What's the employer's role if they have employees that are wearing maybe hats or t-shirts that say Black Lives Matter or say his name, and it may be offensive to other people? How does an employer handle these kinds of things?
It's somewhat difficult because, again, employers have always, or at least up until recently, have tried to stay on the sidelines as much as they can. But now it's much more, employers are getting involved. So there's a lot that goes with that question. The first is First Amendment. If you are a private employer, there's actually no First Amendment right within your organization. Your employee does not have a First Amendment. The First Amendment applies to the government. You are not the government if you are a private employer. And so you are allowed to restrict speech. Taking what I just said about diversity and inclusion, you may not want to, because like I said, listening to your employees might be that first step towards diversity and inclusion. And so sometimes you might want to have that conversation and see why someone is wearing that mask. But if you're a private employer, you may not, you don't need to. Another thing that is implicated with that is a uniform policy, which again, because there's no First Amendment right, you are allowed to have a uniform policy. You are allowed to say, you're only allowed to display our logo. Again, take that with what I had previously said about having communications and being open to that conversation. But again, you can apply your uniform policy if you wanted to do that. If you did not have a policy that didn't prohibit that, I would hesitate to discipline someone just because they're wearing, say, like a Black Lives Matter, or I think Debbie said, say his name, the other, I can't breathe. All of those are obviously associated with a race. And so Title VII does have association claims. And so if you are just punishing someone because they are associated with the Black Lives Matter movement, you may run afoul of Title VII. So you do want to be cautious there. If you had a uniform policy that said, no, you're not allowed to have any extraneous writing, you have to wear our company logo shirt, you can enforce that policy. But otherwise, you want to be careful around Title VII that you are not running into an association claim by only disciplining employees who wear Black Lives Matter logos or clothing or masks, and not disciplining someone who is wearing some other mask that is associated with some other group that may not be directly associated with a race.
That sounds great. And I encourage anybody else, if they have any questions, please go ahead and put them into the chat box. We want to make sure we answer everybody's questions before we leave tonight. And then in the future, we have some people in mind to be able to address more of the diversity and inclusion matters for businesses. So being a hot new item for some businesses, we want to make sure we answer your questions. So any other questions, burning questions out there from anybody, either about COVID, diversity, inclusion? Joe?
Yes, I have a question, George. How do you think our community can move from understanding we are a diverse community to be more of an inclusive business community? Specifically, those organizations that are very influential and drive change in our community, boards of influence, foundations, things like that, because we're not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at many of our influential organizations, leadership, they don't look like people of color in Colorado Springs.
Mm-hmm. And so with like diversity and inclusion, I think, and this is, I'm borrowing from others who have taught on this. This is not mine, but diversity is just putting someone in the room. Inclusion is inviting them to dance. And so we may have organizations that have individuals, a diverse population, but like you're talking about, Joe, the upper level management may not be diverse at all. And so it's opening up those opportunities and making sure that employers are conscientious about those things. Again, Title VII does put some constraints in there, but I have talked to a lot of employers, and there are steps that you can take to make sure you are getting a more diverse candidate pool, which hopefully will move up, but also when you are looking at upper level management, inviting that diverse candidate pool to apply for those positions. A lot of employers, and this goes back to that unconscious bias with regards to just diversity, which is kind of that first step. But we all, again, have some upbringing and some unconscious biases. And so we advertise our jobs in ways that maybe is going towards people that look like us or have the same upbringing as us. And so just getting out of that mindset and saying, how can we expand our candidate pool to make sure that we are getting a more diverse candidate pool? And again, that goes for entry level all the way up to the top. But looking at things like that, where are we advertising? How are we advertising? How are we reaching people? Are we going to make sure we are getting into diverse communities so that we are getting diverse candidate pools? So I agree with you. I think it is going to be a concerted effort by employers to, one, make sure they are attracting a diverse workforce, but also encouraging that diverse workforce to move up in the organization and looking to that diverse workforce to get into those higher level positions.
Thank you.
Well, Joe, I know, George, we're putting you a bit on the spot just because I know you're dealing more with law type issues, and a lot of the stuff that we're trying to do or ask you about are not necessarily law. It's actually dealing with just human decency and being, being inclusive. So this is a difficult place, but is there a point where you see this becoming law, some kind of enforcement of law?
So Title VII is the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Sorry, I'm using acronyms that I use. So that is the big discrimination law. That is always in the background. It's funny because it's one that does push both ways. It's the one that makes it harder for employers to go out and hire diverse candidates because they do need to make sure they're being non-discriminatory in their hiring practices. But it is also the one where employers can get in trouble if they are exclusively hiring one race or one sex. So that is one law that is currently in place. Another is affirmative action plans. And being that you're Southern Colorado, Colorado Springs, there's a lot of federal contractors. They may be subject to affirmative action plans. Those do not put quotas, but they do encourage employers to take steps like I was talking about, where they are attracting a more diverse workforce. Employers that are subject to that, again, that is the law. They need to have a plan to show the federal government that they are trying to attract a more diverse workforce. Even if you are not subject to an affirmative action plan, you can take those same steps. So again, that's another law. I have heard of other states. California, I think, is the big one, who has started to explore laws where boards of employers need to meet certain quotas. I know California is exploring that. Again, Title VII would potentially be an impediment, and it's funny because Title VII was not meant to necessarily be an impediment to actions like that, but the way it is written, it currently would be an impediment. But there are states who are exploring quota type laws that say your board needs to look like your community. So if you are in LA, which is extremely diverse, your board should not be all white males. It should be diverse like the community that you serve. Colorado currently does not. I have not seen any proposals to do anything like that. But again, as other states see how others have implemented, they usually borrow. The healthy families, that paid sick leave that I was talking about, that is borrowed from Arizona, who did it first. Colorado didn't just make that up out of whole cloth. They went and looked at other states. So if California did do something like that, I would not be surprised if other states didn't follow.
Okay. Any last questions? All right. Well, George, thank you for joining us today. Lot of information that you provided for us. It's a kind of almost overwhelming. But at the same time, I know that you've got some great resources for us too, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion. We'll want to see what you may have for us to share to our membership. So
Yeah,
thank you for doing that for us. Thank you all here. Lola's got some final words. She wants to go ahead and let us know.
Sure, great. Hey, George, I'm from Chi-Town too, so I kind of missed the Chicago pizza. So, you and I need to get together. So when I go back and you go back, we bring back some Lou Malnati's for each other.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Chicago's about very different, multicultural city for sure in so many aspects. Culturally, ethnicity, races, all of that. So it's a very different living probably here for you in Colorado Springs.
Yeah, yeah. But we do love access to the mountains as always.
Yeah.
Can't beat that. Yeah.
That's right. Well, thank you, George. I really appreciate your time today. Please, if you can, provide those resources, and maybe you and I could connect for coffee sometime
Yeah.
soon. Maybe have you come over to our offices here at the Chamber, and maybe we could collaborate together on some projects.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, everybody, thank you. Our luncheon's coming up. I also want to mention a couple other announcements, which I think Debbie could fill you in on the great workshop what we're going to be doing coming up in October to November. I think I'll have Debbie talk about that. But I do want to give a shout out again to Lytle Electric and Megan Lytle for sponsoring these quick and 1 hour sessions, town halls that really bring valuable information and maybe information you didn't know about before, and now you have it. So we'll continue to do this for the next couple months. We will take December and not have one in December, I believe. I think everybody needs a rest and maybe hopefully enjoy the holidays during that time frame. Mark your calendars. So far, we are going to have a hybrid mode lunch, holiday luncheon, and I will deliver the State of the Chamber address on December 8th. So that's another big one of our events coming up here in the fall. Other than that, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie to tell you a little bit about our luncheon speakers and our workshop.
Great, thanks. And Lola's correct. We've got some great things coming up. Next week, we're going to be having our luncheon. Again, as before, it's going to be a hybrid luncheon. And we're going to have Susan Frew joining us. She's going to be talking. She has a great program. What does she call it? It's called, oh gosh, I lost it. It's called the Pufferfish Effect. So she's a wonderful international speaker. You guys won't want to miss that. So please go online and register for that. Like I said, in October, we're going to have a town hall, and we're going to be addressing some of the ballot issues that are most concerning to businesses, including the Family Leave Act, as well as the Gallagher amendment repeal that they're looking at trying to they're trying to get people to support. So we'll have people speaking about both those ballot issues. You won't want to miss that because, as you know, Election Day is right around the corner. It's going to give you some good information. And Lola mentioned that we're going to be having a workshop with Kelly McDonald. That's going to be starting in October. Kelly was a former accolade speaker for us, and she has said she was going to go ahead and give us a free workshop. I wouldn't say free. It's going to be at a severely discounted rate for all of us. But you'll want to go ahead and reserve every Monday from October 14th through November. Looks like it's going to be, I'm sorry. Yeah, starting October 14th is a Wednesday, and it's going to go through November the 21st. She's going to be speaking on how businesses are going to be coming back after COVID and what you can do now to be able to plan for a remarkable recovery. She's a very well-known speaker and has provided these workshops for a lot of people, gotten businesses back up and running after the pandemic here. So something you don't want to miss. As of this time, we really don't have too much more to do. We're going to be letting you guys get out early. And I know that Lola has to jump here too. Lola, you're still online, are you not?
Yes, I am.
You may be able to take a few minutes here to answer some questions for some people who normally would wait until 5 o'clock to talk to you.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions or needs to know anything about the chamber, I'm open to stay on here. at least for the next 10 minutes or so here before I have to hop into the CEO roundtable at 5 o'clock. So if you want to unmute yourself, go right ahead. If there's a specific question that you want to ask the chamber, I'm more than happy to answer. If you'd rather contact me offline and need to contact the chamber or need to find some additional resources so we can help your business succeed, please do so. Just, chat privately in the chat box and let me know that you'd like a private conversation with me, and I'm more than happy to assist you.
Great. George, once again, thank you for joining us. You are free to leave.